Now, one of the things we know from science is that about 90 to 95% of everything that we think, say, and do is going to come from that subconscious. We also know that 80% of the thoughts that you have today are 80% of the thoughts you had yesterday. And it
Yeah.
would be 80% of the thoughts you have tomorrow. So it's about interrupting that pattern in
Yes.
being able to
Yes.
deal with some of this thing. So if we were going to extrapolate, go back to the bars here for a second. What are the bars doing when you're getting that energy to flow in a rhythmic pattern that allows this field to be generated? So if we can talk for just a moment about the morphogenetic field,
Yes.
because
Please. Yeah.
that's uh, starting back in 2019. I was doing some research with a group called VibraVision, VibraVision, and so these are people who could put adhesive bandages over their eyes. They could put a blindfold on top of that. They could drive a go-kart around an oval track without crashing. You could drop colored beanbags in their hand. They could tell you what color it was before the beanbag hit the hand. Now, as we were doing brain maps for years on people who could do this very well and people who couldn't do it hardly at all, and comparing that, it wasn't until sometime later when we began to, in one of my meditations, I received kind of a intuitive hit of you're looking in the wrong place. And so as it turns out, it was the field that was causing that. Now, let's talk a little bit about that field and what goes on with that field. So whatever your energy is that you're giving off, if you walk into a room full of people and whatever that frequency is, that energy that you're giving off, the other person is going to be attracted to. So we go back to this function of a thought, and the energy is like it is you're being attracted to it. And so we are always being attracted to whatever this is. Now, let's take and extrapolate this into the bars. So here I am, I'm laying in this chair, and they're working on me, and I'm having this feeling with a great big smile on my face because it's generating this field around me. Just like the people of VibraVision, how is it that they could do what they did? And there was actually a gal by the name of Caroline Corey, and she had produced a movie called Superhuman, Making the Invisible Visible. And so myself and a couple other scientists were on this show that not that particular movie. It's still out there. It's a great movie. But we did this event live with 3 different locations around the world with kids who could put the blindfold on top, and then they could do these amazing things. And so then we were explaining how all of that basically happened. So a lot of it has to do with the morphogenetic field. Now, it's not just the field that we create, but there's something that Rupert Sheldrake brought into being called morphic resonance. And so as they're dropping colored beanbags into these people's hands, they are feeling the resonance of the color, the vibration of that color, and that's how they can tell. Now, some of them don't know that that's what they're doing, but that's what we found out in our studies about some of this information and so forth. So that morphic resonance is what was going on. So here I am laying in the chair and having this feeling, generating this field around myself, and just enjoying the energy of that field, not realizing that that's what was actually going on. And so as that's happening, now I'm engulfed in that. So the energy and the information is then being, we have the field around us. So there is energy in the field that is around us. Now, one of the things that we know, there are 3 electromagnetic centers that are very important to all this, and I'll come back to the story here in just a second. But one of them is our chakras. So when we look at our chakras and the energy field that creates, and then the second energy field is around our heart. And so a lot of people don't realize, but the heart, the energy field, the electromagnetic field around our heart is 60 times greater than the energy field around our brain. Now,
Wow.
so
Wow.
the information is trafficked through the vagus nerve from our heart to our brain, and being able to trigger those neuropeptides that then cause, if we're feeling anxious or overwhelmed or feeling whatever it is. So the information that is being carried, like in the bars, the information in that field, and we are resonating to that information as we're going through that process. So there is a flow of this coherent energy, and that coherent energy is very, very important in being able. So we see things like in the Tai Chi and Qigong, other modalities and that sort of thing, where you do this and you get the energy and you can feel the energy. Well, that's the field that is being generated. The bars are doing the same thing. It's generating this field, and then through the process of the bars, being able to get that energy to flow, to direct that energy. Let me give you a little side story here. So there was a story with somebody that I had interviewed or talked with a while ago, and he was doing Tai Chi or Qigong. I forget which one it was, but they had just finished their class, and they were a group of the people in the class were just standing around out in front of the dojo and just chit-chatting. And one of the women in there had a purse over her shoulder, and a guy ran past and snatched her purse just about the same time that the dojo master came outside and saw this happen. So he got the energy, and then he directed the energy. Boom, what do you do with the energy? And the energy hit this guy, knocked him up on his back. He fell onto the pavement, and they retrieved the purse. Now, there's lots and lots and lots of things that happen in different cultures. For example, if you are familiar with Huna, like in the Hawaiian Islands, Max Freedom Long did this years ago, and he was there when this happened. They were doing a barbecue or something on the beach, and this guy drove up, and I guess he was a little inebriated. And when he stepped out of the car and stepped onto the sand, he twisted his leg and the bone snapped. He had a compound fracture, so the bone was actually sticking out of the skin. And a lot of people were saying, get an ambulance, call an ambulance, call an ambulance. And this woman who practices Huna she pushed her way up to the front and said, hold on, give me a second here. And so she started working with his leg, and was able to direct that energy, to tell that energy, here's what I want you to do. And it did. And then she said, okay, I'm done. You can stand up now. You're fine. He stood up. There was no evidence of having a broken leg, and he was able to walk fine. We see this, there are videos out there on YouTube about how the direction of that energy would get rid of a cancerous growth in a person. So they were using, technology to look at that and watch, and in a matter of 20 minutes, this tumor dissolved. So the power of that energy really depends on what is your intention. Let me bring something up here, and I'll show you a study that we did. Let me share my screen here. And
wow, I just love how everything you're talking about, there's such a great correlation, parallel, like with access consciousness. So that's, wow. Like when you were talking about, like when you were receiving bars and the space of the field around you, it's like, it truly does create this space. And it is like, it interrupts like all the spinning in the brain.
So you have the polarity of the energy there, since we're talking about this, and that's kind of where we're going to go here in a minute. But you've got the polarity of the energy, and being able to look at the negative polarity and the positive polarity. So when you're dealing with that field around the bars, and this really deserves a lot more study about when the positive polarity is there. And I'm working with a doctoral student right now on some energy stuff. She lives in London, and we're looking at how she is going to design. She's getting her PhD in integrative medicine, and so we're looking at what can be done with that energy. So that field, there is something that is polarizing within that field. So it's not polarizing to the negative field. The energy is of a high nature. So I'm not going to get into some of the physics of where that is right now, but this is part of what we're looking at with the doctoral candidate here, and looking at how that positive energy. So based on what I know now, the polarity of that energy when doing the bars has to be of a very high percentage, very fast, and very I'm not sure of the word that I'm looking for, but the energy has to be very positive. And so that's why we have a very positive experience, because we get that field going and the energy is flowing in that positive manner through that field. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so let me explain this graph here. This is part of a study that we did back in, I think we did this in 2015. And I have a device called a Sputnik. And it looks like a marble with a bunch of spikes through it, and it can measure the energy. So we had a giver and we had a receiver, you know, and this is going to sound very strangely like the bars, because it is. Yeah. So this is the result of some of that stuff. So in looking at that energy, I've got 4 different things here, and this Sputnik would capture the energy between the giver and the receiver once every 3 seconds. And so we did this over a 90-minute period. And so we have all of these captures, these little dots here that you can kind of see, our screen captures looking at the giver and the receiver. Now, when we look at the red one down here, we see a bunch of white spaces. Can you see those white spaces there?
Yeah.
That is a lack of coherent energy. And so these people were just going through a rote experience. They were just doing what they were told. Here is the protocol. This is what you do. And I do this first and this second, this third, that sort of thing. But the energy itself, the field was not fully formed. And so let me explain the graph here. Over here on the y-axis is the amount of energy that we were measuring. And then the x-axis down here is the number of screen captures that we were looking at over that 90-minute period. So let's go to the blue one here, and you see a bunch of white spaces down here. And then about 2/3 of the way through, the energy begins to increase and then plateaus. I call this one the dinosaur, you know, because
yeah, absolutely.
But you can see we begin to the energy becomes more and more coherent, and so we don't see as many white spaces. Now we look at the green one here, and we see a little bit more energy. They kind of all start in the same place, you know, and then this one, the energy grows. We see about 2/3 of the way through here, we start to see some white spaces, but before that, we don't see any white spaces. We just see a lot of energy, coherent energy. The field is coherent, okay? Wow. And this is about as high as it goes. Then here's what we learned in all of this here, that when we look at the brown one here, the amount of energy, and we don't see any white spaces until almost at the end when their brain kind of wandered off a little bit. And we found 3 different things. One was the focus, one was concentration, and the other was intention. So when they applied all 3 of those, it caused the energy to get higher, and the energy was also more coherent. Whereas these other people who were just kind of going through the motions, and so if they had the intention, that's when the energy became more coherent. And so when you are directing that energy, so if a person is doing the bars, if they are focused, concentrating on what they're doing, and they have an intention of what they want that energy to do, then we can see that it's actually commanding that power of thought, if you will, and basically being able to get there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, in one of the sorry, it was the PGS movie that you were in, and your quote in that movie was "Be here now."
Yeah.
And I just love that, because it's like this is what this reality is. We've become into this like human doing, right? And this is just complete proof of like this is presence, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
I'll share a little story. When I was at Quantum University, and I was having lunch with Amit Goswami one day, and we're sitting outside, and it's a beautiful day and stuff. And so we're talking about this very thing that you're discussing here, doing and being, you know. And so he was saying, well, we all can't be doing all the time, you know, and we can't be being all the time. We don't go up in the mountains and live in a cave to do all that. He says it's more like, and I love this, he says it's more like doobie doobie do.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah. So we have to have that balance of what's going on in our physical life in order to deal with that. And so we're seeing some evidence of that in this graph here, you know, that when people would take the time, the 90 minutes, to stay focused, concentrate on what they're doing, and then have a defined intention. And I think that's one of the marvelous things that the bars teaches, is how to have intention. So I did some intention experiments with, gosh, I forgot her name. But we did some intention experiments and looked at the intention of the energy. And when you are giving that intention of what you want it to do, then it begins to happen, just like we see here in this graph. And Lynn McTaggart, that's who I was trying to think of.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
And so we had done a number of experiments and things, and have talked back and forth. I haven't talked to her for years, but I'm a big admirer of her work. And I think she does, because intention is so much a part of all of this, but we don't think about it. You know, it's just like with the morphic resonance, when they're dropping the colored bean bags and they're picking up the vibration of that, the resonance of that. So the same thing is happening when you're looking at the bars in the field here and what's going on with that, that the polarity that we talked about earlier, the positive field that is around there, is allowing that positive energy to function at a higher rate. And that's what we're seeing here with the brown. So if you're taking and learning how to have focus, concentration, and intention when you're doing that, then I guarantee that people are going to have a much more effective bars experience. Now, what I would like to do is do your brain, that you've been doing 45 days of this, and we will talk about this off the air here. But
awesome.
I can scan you, even though you're in Canada. I can scan you, put you in the scanner, and we can measure your brain and the energy and the frequencies and stuff that's going on in your brain and your body. And we can look at that in 3 dimensions.
Wow.
So if you're up for that experiment, we'll do it. And then maybe we can come back on sometime later and share the results with people. But I kind of know what that's going to look like. It's going to be cool.
That's just, you know, Dr. Fannin, it totally leads me into, like, when people have these profound transformations of any kind, like, I've heard you, and of course Joe Dispenza, talk about this, where there is this heart and brain coherence. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, you bet. Yeah. So I have been a HeartMath trainer, I think since about 2014, 2015, somewhere in there, and working with people. So when we look at the coherence of that energy and the heart and the brain, it's that relationship. Let me go back to the electromagnetic center around the heart, and it's 60 times greater.